All-Round View by Khan Imran, published in 1988 by Chatto and Windus Limited, 30 Bedford Square, London. All rights reserved. Copyright Imran Khan, 1988. Topics: Biography, Sports, Cricket, Pakistan, Khan, Imran, Cricket Players, Autobiography, Cricket Biographies. Chapter 3: All Over the Place. It's possible that some of the Australian players may have realized that the first Packer series could lead to a serious rift in the cricketing world. But I don't think any of the West Indian, Pakistani or English players harbored such suspicions. With hindsight, this seems extremely naive. After all, the Australian board was unlikely to take a parallel series lying down. Most of us assumed that some agreement would be reached that would include Kerry Packers Australia versus a World 11 project. Little did we know that all the hell was about to break loose. The Australian board banned their players who had signed with Packer and put pressure on the ICC to have the rest of us banned. Although it was not their problem, the Pakistani and English boards fell into line. Those countries whose players had not been invited by Packer, India and New Zealand, joined the shrill chorus of denunciation. Only the West Indian controlling body approached the matter sensibly. The moment the battle lines had been drawn up, Kerry Packer signed the whole West Indian team as well as additional English and Pakistani players, Mushtaq and Zahir. The reaction to our signing with Kerry Packer was so extreme and so ludicrous that the players closed ranks and were determined to stick it out, even if it meant foregoing their test careers for a while. We embarked on a couple of seasons of Packer cricket with some misgivings, but a good deal of excitement at the prospect of playing with and against the players in the world. For Packer cricket was to be the toughest test of skill and stamina I have ever experienced. On the other hand, it lacked the tension of test matches and the adrenaline that flows when one plays for one's country. Beyond a certain point, it is difficult to bowl to brilliant batsmen or face a battery of fast bowlers day after day, simply in order to prove one's individual worth. Packer cricket was unremittingly difficult that some batsmen were permanently scared by the experience. All three teams, Australia, the West Indies and the World 11, had some ferocious pace attacks that there was never any relief. Despite the introduction of helmet, which were absolutely essential, batting was a hazardous business. There were no minor games in which a batsman could recuperate. A few repetitions were made, but more were punctured. Vivian Richards stood out. One could see that he was in a different class from the Chappell brothers, Barry Richards, Majid and Greenidge, all of whom were great players but really in the second rank compared to Viv at the time. Of the Pakistani batsmen, Mushtaq, already suspect against pace, vanished into oblivion. Majid, who had stopped playing for Glamorgan and had taken 7 months off from cricket, was not prepared for the caliber of bowling he had to face, and it took him some time to adjust. He was never quite the batsman he should have been. Zahir did not make an impact until the second year. Surprisingly, Asif Iqbal proved to be not only the best Pakistani batsman but also one of the most successful middle-order batsmen of the Packer years. Some reputations were damaged beyond repair, particularly Tony Greig's. His bowling was largely innocuous and his batting technique was exposed by the barrage of short-pitched bowling. Ironically, one of the main organisers of Packer cricket was quite unsuited to meet its special demands. As far as I was concerned, the Packer years were largely beneficial. I had the chance to learn from watching the world's finest fast bowlers. Mike Proctor and John Snow taught me a lot. Snow emphasized the necessity of getting side on and closer to the stems, while Proctor helped me with my run-up, which was still that of a medium pacer, short and mincing. This put a strain on me and destroyed my rhythm. After a lot of hard work, I got it right. A smooth, natural approach, culminating in a jump that helped me to get side on. I also learned how to use the entire width of the bowling crease. By the end of the Packer era, I could produce spells of accurate and hostile fast bowling with some regularity. This was also the period in which my star status was established. Packer's organization chose to promote individuals in a way that had never been attempted before. They did their bit, and I did mine by performing on the field. Since then, the media hype has hardly stopped, for good and for bad. All the publicity over the years had primarily to do with being a successful cricketer. The rest was incidental as far as I was concerned. Packer cricket was responsible for many major developments in the sport. The improvement of protective gear was a direct result of the unusual number of fast bowlers in the World Series cricket. Injuries were frequent and the batsmen urgently needed better protection. The number of one-day internationals also went up dramatically. The original idea was to stage super test, but public interest and the players' enthusiasm for this form of cricket could not be sustained in the absence of official test status. Ian Chappell was largely responsible for keeping the team motivated for the 5-day game. It soon became apparent that the one-day format attracted larger crowds, and this led not only to an increase in the number of one-day matches but also to the introduction of night cricket, together with colored clothing and a white ball. Night cricket attracted an entirely new type of spectator to the game. The conservatives in our midst had their reservations, but the rest of us who thought we were part of revolution wanted to try it out. Another feature of the Packer cricket was the personalization and marketing of players so as to appeal to live and television spectators. In the absence of patriotic passions, the game was promoted by emphasizing its entertainment value and by glamorizing the players, largely through outstanding television coverage. Up to 9 cameras were employed to give multi-angle replays and close-ups. Before the first night match at Sydney, the players and organisers sat around waiting to see what kind of response this strange scheme would get. It succeeded beyond anyone's wildest imagination. The ground was sold out and the spectator response was fantastic. World Series cricket was responsible for bringing the game into line with the commercial demands of modern sport players. Salaries rose dramatically, not just for test players, but for other first-class cricketers as well. The game also generated more income as sponsors and advertisers became conscious of its market value, and the influx of money and glamour made it more likely that talented young players would want to make a career out of cricket. Such sweeping changes inevitably had their drawbacks. Commercialization undermined certain aspects of the game, but this was probably inevitable, and World Series cricket only hastened the process. Of more immediate relevance was the ill feeling that pervaded the game for 2 years and the devolution of Test cricket in this period as a result of banning of the Packer players. I was surprised by the intense hostility most county cricketers showed towards the Packerites. At a special Cricketers Association meeting in England, 60% of the members wanted Packer players to be banned from county cricket. Even worse, a majority supported a motion demanding the expulsion of all overseas players from county cricket as well. This meeting was a real eye-opener, and I resigned my membership of the association on the spot. I found its position untenable and hypocritical, for it had taken no such stand over the issue of apartheid. In fact, the association supported players who chose to supplement their income by going to South Africa. Obviously, no moral principles were involved in the association's stand against the Packer players. It seemed to be much more a question of jealousy. For example, Bob Willis turned very anti-Packer, yet he had been on the verge of signing for Packer and only decided against because he discovered that by staying in Test cricket he could make more money. And yet, for all the excitement of World Series cricket, I really missed the tension and commitment of proper Test cricket. Had WSC gone on for another season as originally planned, I think a number of players, including me, would have dropped out. In December 1977, we were informed by Umar Qureshi, a prominent Pakistani journalist and former administrator, that the BCCP wanted us to play in the home series against England. Pleased at this change of heart, Kerry Packer agreed to release us temporarily and even paid part of our travelling expenses. Delighted at the prospect of playing for Pakistan again, Mushtaq, Zahir and I flew home. Meanwhile, the English team had categorically refused to play if we were included. On our arrival in Karachi, we found that we were an unwanted and embarrassing presence for the board, which was split itself and which had succumbed to the threat of a boycott and ranged on their decision to play us. The BCCP refused to acknowledge that we had been summoned. Even our own players gave us the cold shoulder, and in the end, we repacked our bags and flew back to Australia. That summer, 1978, England destroyed what was virtually a Pakistani second team. I was then playing county cricket for Sussex and felt quite depressed watching the series on television. But at least the series revealed the inadequacy of the team without the Packer players. Later that year, the Indian team was due to visit Pakistan, a resumption of cricketing relations after nearly 18 years. It soon became obvious that Pakistani public opinion would not tolerate a series against the old enemy in which all our best players were missing. A new board under General Azhar was formed by General Zia and our ban was lifted. Most of us were playing county cricket when we learned that before long we would not only be playing Test cricket again, but in an historic series against India. I was keen to be at my fittest for this encounter. I had torn a muscle towards the end of the county season, so I had to do all I could to get fit in time for the first test. When we arrived back in Pakistan, the excitement in the country was incredible. The media were full of analysis of and comments about the approaching series. There was a general feeling of optimism about the chances of Pakistan winning its first rubber against India. The media were full of analysis of and comments about the approaching series. There was a general feeling of optimism about the chances of Pakistan winning its first rubber against India. The strength of the Indian side at that time lay in the spin bowling of Bedi, Chandrasekhar and Prasanna. When we arrived at Faisalabad for the first test, Sarfraz and I were amazed when we saw the pitch. There was not a blade of grass on it and it shone like a mirror. India did not have any pace bowling to speak of. Kapil Dev, who made his debut in his test, was still an unknown quantity. When we inquired about the state of the wicket, we learned that the groundsman had been instructed not to provide any kind of surface that the Indian spinners could possibly use. Despite our clear advantage in pace bowling, the fear of losing overrode any attempt to win. Pakistan's cricket establishment, helped by subgodding from senior players, summoned up a bit of courage and prepared a green wicket for the second test in Lahore. This match was played in late October and we knew that whatever life there was in the Gaddafi Stadium pitch would not last long in the heat. Luckily for us, Mushtaq won the toss and put India in to bat. The onus was now squarely on our shoulders. I got 2 early wickets and Salim Altaf accounted for Gavaskar. Then Sarfraz bowled magnificently and we got India out for less than 200. Sarfraz and I took 4 wickets apiece. We put up a huge total entirely due to a splendid double century by Zaheer Abbas, who showed up why he was known as the king of spin, a complete master of spin bowling. He treated the Indian spinners with disdain on a pitch that didn't help them much either. By now the wicket has eased up and we knew that it wouldn't be easy to dismiss India for a second time. The Indian openers Gavaskar and Chetan Chauhan played sensible cricket and put on 192 before we could get our first wicket. With only a day left, it seemed that India would save the match, and they were well on their way to doing so when Mudassir initiated a mid-innings collapse. We were left needing 126 for victory in approximately 100 minutes and reached our target with 8 overs to spare. There was jubilation throughout the country and the government even proclaimed the next day a national holiday. We were now up with 1 match to play. 2 pitches were prepared in Karachi, a green one and a brown batting one. Amazingly, Mushtaq opted for the dead one to protect our lead. However, in spite of the wicket, the match developed quite differently. The atmosphere at Karachi always provides a bit of movement for swing bowlers, and Sarfraz and I were able to work through India's batting lineup until they were all out for 344. When we came to bat, our middle and late order took us from 198 for 5 to 481 for 9 declared. Javed made exactly 100 and all the tail end batsmen contributed useful runs. India's second innings followed the pattern of their first. They had a middle order collapse but were steadied by resolute batting by Gavaskar, who made his second century of the match. But our pace attack steadily chipped away at their batting and, as at Lahore, we dismissed them on the late We dismissed them late on the fifth day, only to be left facing an even more difficult target. An exciting run chase followed. I was promoted to number 4 in the batting order, hitting Beatty for 2 sixes and a 4 in an over, and we reached our target with just 7 balls to spare. We had beaten the Indians 2-0 and the country was ecstatic. Not even in our wildest dreams could we have imagined a more triumphant homecoming. The abuse the Packer players had faced over the past 2 years was suddenly a distant memory. We were all heroes. The series against India sparked off a cricket boom in Pakistan, which has lasted till the present day. The Pakistani public had been brought up on a diet of slow, tedious, negative cricket played on dead pitches, a foolproof recipe for an interminable succession of drawn matches. The victory over India, with the exciting run chases at Lahore and Karachi, was a novel experience for our cricket fans. Television coverage of test matches was also very new, and for the first time people in small towns and even in some villages became part of Pakistan's cricket watching population. Cricket fever reached an incredible pitch, a level of excitement that was only repeated during the 1987 World Cup. Although we had beaten India comprehensively, I didn't share the general belief that Pakistan had a formidable batting lineup. On the evidence of the Indian series, it certainly seemed that way. But I had seen our batsmen play a different class of bowling in Packer cricket and knew their limitations. However, in the general euphoria of our victory over India, nobody was in the mood for a rational assessment of our strengths and weakness. At the end of the series, the Packer players all left for Australia and rejoined World Series cricket. The rest of the team under Mushtaq flew to New Zealand, where we were supposed to meet up with the once our season's commitment to Packer was over. By the time we arrived in New Zealand, Pakistan were already one up in the series with 2 to play. In the first test at Christchurch, Javed Miandad had batted extremely well in both innings, while Mushtaq and Wasim Raja had spun out New Zealand with their leg spinners in the fourth innings. The rest of the series was rather boring and inconsequential. The second test at Napier was a high-scoring draw, but the third and final match at Auckland was interesting for a while. New Zealand batted first, and at one stage Sarfraz and I had reduced them to 60 for 5 before Jeremy Coney and the tail took their score to 254. We made 359 in reply, with Zaheer Abbas scoring a chancy 135. New Zealand went in to bat 105 runs behind. And although I felt their second innings saw one of my better spells in Test cricket, I managed only 2 wickets. I beat the batsmen on numerous occasions and we would have won but for dropped catches and some other dubious umpiring decisions. We left for Australia in March 1979 to play a short end-of-season series consisting of just 2 tests. They were played in as ugly an atmosphere as I have known in my career. This was the first time Packer players had played against non-Packer players in Australia. The media played up this aspect of the series, and the comments of some of the players only served to sour the relationship between the two teams. Asif Iqbal made an extremely ill-judged remark before the series began, saying that the Australian team was substandard and that we were going to play against a bunch of schoolboys. The Australian players, who had just been thrashed 5-1 by England and were desperate to prove themselves, didn't take kindly to such remarks and retaliated. At the first test in Melbourne, we won the toss and chose to bat first, and our vaunted batting lineup was bundled out for 196 by Rodney Hogg and Alan Hurst. My misgivings about our batting order were only strengthened by this dismal performance. Luckily, Australia in their turn could only take 168. The bad feeling between the two sides was deepened by an unfortunate and unnecessary incident. Javed Miandad ran out Rodney Hogg after the batsman had gone down to inspect the pitch. I thought it was very funny because Javed was brought up in the type of highly competitive street cricket in which this sort of thing was commonplace. Every rule in the book was stretched to get people out. Fielders would tell a batsman that he had dropped something on the pitch, and when he went on to retrieve it, they would run him out. The moment Hogg went down the pitch with the ball still in play, I expected something like this might happen. Mushtaq asked the umpire to revoke his decision, but his request was denied. Hogg smashed his stumps before leaving. I was surprised that he left one stump standing, his captain later commented. We made 353 for 9 in our second innings, with Majid contributing a century in typical style. Australia were left needing 382 to win, and we felt sure that their batting was not strong enough to reach such a target. However, Alan Border and Kim Hughes shared a sensible partnership which took Australia to the verge of victory. At one stage, with 7 wickets in hand, they needed only 76 runs to win, which seemed a mere formality. Then Sarfraz Nawaz bowled Border and the Australian batting simply folded up. 5 runs later, they were all out, having collapsed from 305 for 3 to 310 all out. Sarfraz produced what must rank as one of the great spells of bowling in Test cricket, taking the last 7 wickets for 1 run in just 33 deliveries. He finished with an analysis of 9 for 86, the other batsmen being run out. This inspirational spell was typical of Sarfraz, an intelligent and experienced bowler who knew how to make the most of the conditions. He always seemed to know which ball would swing more than others, and as a result, he invariably made the choice when the umpires presented a box of new balls. We went into the second and last test at Perth in a thoroughly negative state of mind, after our captain, Mushtaq, had told us during a meeting that we should make sure we drew the match. I have always been against this type of thinking, because it is usually a recipe for disaster if a team approaches a match with the specific intention of drawing it. Mushtaq packed the team with batsmen and we went into the match with only 3 front-line bowlers. Sarfraz and I had both been playing non-stop cricket for many months now and was showing signs of wear and tear. I had a back strain which had to be treated during the intervals to keep me going. Sikandar Bakht pulled a muscle and could only bowl 10.5 overs in the match, which left Sarfraz and me to do the bulk of the bowling. We batted first and, apart from Javed Miandad, who made 129, none of the other batsmen made many runs and we were dismissed for a mere score of 277 against what was virtually a 2-man bowling attack. Australia had little trouble in taking a lead of 50. In the second innings, our batsmen once again failed under pressure, and only a fighting century by Asif Iqbal kept us in the game. Asif and Sikandar Bakht were putting out stubborn resistance for the last wicket when Hurst ran out Sikandar as he was backing up. Asif then smashed the stumps just as Hogg had in Melbourne. We were thoroughly incensed by this and decided that we would retaliate as soon as an opportunity presented itself. Australia were 87 for no wickets and well on their way to victory when Andrew Hitch retrieved a wayward return and handed the ball to the bowler. Sarfraz appealed, and Hilditch was given out for handling the ball. Australia then proceeded to win the match quite early by 7 wickets. The series left an unpleasant taste in the mouth and a big question mark over the strength of our team. We had managed to draw the series only by the skin of our teeth against an inexperienced Australian side that was missing most of its top players. It was an ill-conceived, ill-judged series which the Australian board had arranged simply to deny Packer any further chance of televised cricket, and we should never have played it. By the end of the series, the Australian press and the crowds were extremely hostile to us as a result of the ugly incidents on the field. The defeat at Perth also signalled the end of Mushtaq Mohammad's captaincy. He was no longer certain of his place in the team. As a batsman, he was now thoroughly suspect against pace bowling and he was basically playing as a leg spinner. As his batting deteriorated, he had become increasingly defensive and nervous as the captain. Asif Iqbal, who was batting better than ever, was appointed the new captain for the 1979 World Cup and the subsequent tour of India. The era of superstars, the Packer players, was coming to an end as most of them had passed their peak. But because of the poor standard of Pakistan's domestic cricket, new talent was not available. Pakistan's performance in the 1979 World Cup emphasized our decline as well as the team's collective inability to cope with tension. We lost our group match with England after restricting them to 165 in 60 overs. Our batting capitulated against excellent bowling by Mike Hendrick, and at one stage we were 34 for 6. Despite this pathetic performance by our top order, we lost the match by only 15 runs and had to play the West Indies in the semi-finals. We gave them quite a fight on a feather-bed pitch at the Oval. They put up a huge total of 293 for 6. But the wicket was so slow that not even the West Indian pace quarter could get anything out of it, and at one stage we were 176 for 1, with Majid and Zahir playing brilliantly. By now the West Indies bowling was looking quite raged and they were patently nervous. After Zahir's dismissal, I felt that Asif should have changed the batting order and not sent in Harun Rashid, who lacked sufficient experience of one-day cricket and got bogged down. Harun wasted valuable overs and put unnecessary pressure on the rest of the batting, and our senior batsmen got out trying to force the pace. In 1978, Pakistan and India had resumed cricketing relations after some 18 years. it had taken that long to overcome the hostility engendered by two wars between the countries. Sporting encounters between Pakistan and India have always generated high passions. Even now, in one-day cricket, winning against each other is considered more important than eventual success in the competition. Sporting encounters strain the fragile relationship between Muslim and Hindu in India. People die of heart attacks during tests, and 10-year-old boys have stabbed each other during heated arguments about cricket matches. The Indian team was comprehensively beaten on its tour of Pakistan in 1978-79. When we returned to India the following year, we were clear favourites. Even Gavaskar, then India's captain, issued a statement saying that we would win easily. India's great spinners Bedi, Chandrasekhar and Prasanna had retired. While Venkatara Ghavan was out of form and favour, India's bowling attack of Kapil Dev, Ghauri, Binni, Doshi and Yadav didn't seem to pose much of a threat to our array of stroke makers, but we were overconfident. Mistakes had been made in selection. Sarfraz was omitted because Asif Iqbal, our new captain, felt he could not handle him, and Mushtaq, the only survivor from the previous tour of India, was left out as he was considered suspect against high pace. Although this was true, he would not have been in trouble against India's limited pace attack. None of the players had any notion of the pressures of an Indian tour. From the moment we arrived, it seemed as though the entire country had become a huge spotlight trained solely on us. The relentless publicity, the huge partisan crowds in the jet-packed stadiums, the expectations of our own public, all these were too much for some of our players. Our batting, never famous for its resilience, went to pieces. Zahir, always highly strung, was the first to crack. The previous year he had scored 583 runs, averaging 194.33. In the three tests against India, this time he averaged 19 and seemed visibly relieved when he was dropped for the final test. Majid looked shaky and averaged only 20 despite being dropped down the order in the later matches. Mudassar, our other opener, hit a century in the first test but never passed 30 after that. After the first test, we never reached 300 in any innings. Only Wasim Raja and to some extent Javed Miadad emerged with any credit from the tour. Despite the fact that our batting flopped, we should have drawn or even won the series. The wicket for the second test at Delhi helped the seamers, but I was hampered by a rib muscle injury and bowled only 8.3 overs. Sikandar Buck bowled his heart out and took 11 wickets, but it was not enough and India were able to bat out the last day and a half. After this test, it was suggested that Sarfraz should be called in reinforce the team, but Asif refused even to consider the proposal. I was therefore under great pressure to play in the third test, which I did. The rib muscle went again in my first over and I was in acute pain afterwards. I did dismiss Chauhan, after which Iqbal Qasim and Sikandar reduced India to 154 for 6, but I was unable to come back, and the tail-enders added 180. Neither side topped 200 in the other innings and India won on the fourth day. Knowing I would definitely miss the fourth test at Kanpur, India produced a well-grassed pitch, supposedly to assist Kapil Dev. They batted and struggled to 162 against our backup seamers, Sikandar and Ishtahamuddin. We replied with 249 thanks almost entirely to Wasim Raja's brilliant 94 not out and were in a useful position before rain, which penetrated the covers, washed out the final day's play. Although I was still not fully fit, I felt I had to play in the fifth test, but it was apparent that our team had given up. They were thoroughly despondent. There was an atmosphere of despair in the dressing room, and when we batted, some players were too nervous to watch. On a perfect batting pitch, we were dismissed for 272 with the number of batsmen reaching 30, but none of them having the patience or the will to stick it out. Zahir, who was convinced that someone had to put a spell on him, made a duck. When India batted, Gavaskar, a master of attrition, made 166 in almost 10 hours and set up the match for his side. I took 5 wickets, not a bad effort as my injury was still very painful. Our second innings batting display was even worse and India won easily by 10 wickets. By the last test, I was fully fit and took 9 wickets. I thought that we had a chance to salvage some self-respect before going home, but there was to be no fairy tale ending. We dropped a number of catches and let India off the hook. They took the series 2-0. All of us dreaded returning home, and we were right. No Pakistani team has ever had to face such humiliation collectively and individually. Our failure was attributed to non-stop partying and a thoroughly irresponsible way of life. Apparently, we had all indulged in winning, dining and womanizing throughout the tour. There was little sympathy for my muscle injury, which I had evidently contracted while performing debauched calisthenics with Indian actresses. Realistically, it should have been pointed out that our batting had always tended to collapse under pressure. But in the context of India-Pakistan series, rational analysis is rare indeed. The press thrives and innuendo, gossip, rumor, and outright slander, and still more so at the first sign of defeat. My biggest crime was to have been outperformed by India's star all-rounder Kapil Dev. Foreseeing these recriminations, Asif Iqbal announced his retirement before we arrived home. During the tour, he was a shadow of his former self. He was on tranquilizers and already a wiry man. He lost a lot of weight. It was not until 1986-87 when I toured India as captain and lost half a stone that I understood the pressure he must have been under. It was this story of dishonor and disgrace that was primarily responsible for my continuing to bowl through the 1982-83 series against India with a leg fracture. The desire to erase the bad memories of that tour by comprehensively beating the old enemy was too strong. Since then, I have realized that such passions are out of place on the cricket field and can only do harm. But it is difficult to be objective when one's country's hopes and one's self-respect are riding on the result of a series. After our return from India, Asif retired, the entire board was changed and there was widespread disenchantment with the senior players. The new president of the board, Air Marshal Noor Khan decided that it was time to make sweeping changes and appointed Javed Miandad captain over the heads of at least 6 players. This was a major error which led to immediate problems, since Javed was too young to handle the team and it was unfair on him to make him captain. Zaheer in particular felt hard done by. As the senior player, he thought he should have been the new captain. Australia toured Pakistan early in 1980 and the cracks in the team were temporarily papered over by the old method of preparing slow pitches. We won the first test at Karachi on a slow turning wicket, then proceeded to draw the other two on pitches that were so placid that it was difficult to complete an innings. The nature of the pitches was reflected in Dennis Lilly's performance. In 3 tests, he could only take 3 wickets and conceded over 300 runs. At Faisalabad, even Taslim Arif, the wicket-keeper, made a double century against him. The familiar scoreline of Court Marsh bowled Lilly was nowhere in evidence throughout the series. However, the series against Australia proved nothing about our abilities, while Javed made the atmosphere within the team more tense by dropping Zaheer for the 3rd test at Lahore. The following winter, the West Indies toured Pakistan and the same strategy was adopted. But despite the slow, underprepared pitches, the West Indies pace battery of Marshall, Garner, Croft and Clark proved too much to handle. In the first test at Lahore on a perfect wicket, we collapsed to 95 for 5. Batting at number 7, I recorded my first test century on my 28th birthday, so enabling us to reach 369, and from that point on the match headed towards an inevitable draw. The next test at Faisalabad was played on a spinning wicket and everything seemed to be in our favour. But once again our batting revealed our complete inability to handle sustained pace bowling. Zaheer, who had missed the first test on the pretext of a shoulder injury, looked thoroughly suspect against pace and was in a terrible state against Marshall and Clark, actually backing away from the fast bowling. I knew that this was the beginning of the end for Zaheer's reputation, because once a batsman is known to be afraid of pace, he is in real trouble and very rarely comes back, and every pace bowler then pitches short to him. The first day and a half of the 3rd test at Karachi was washed out. Then Javed Miandad made the peculiar decision to bat first on a wicket that was still damp and we were blasted out for 128. The match did nothing for Zaheer's confidence after a Clark bouncer had left a dent in his helmet. The West Indies did not fare much better, however, and Iqbal Qasim and I dismissed them for 169. We went into this test with only one seam bowler, myself. I found myself tiring very quickly because with a spinner operating at the other end, I did not get much time to recuperate between overs. Because of the loss of the play due to rain, the match was drawn. In the last test match at Multan, which was also drawn because of rain, I produced my best bowling of the series, taking 5 for 62 in the West Indies' first innings. Vivian Richards played a superb innings for them, making 120 out of 249 and holding the innings together in his own imitable fashion. The story of our first innings was a repetition of the previous matches. It made no difference how slow we made the pitches and we couldn't even reach 200. By the end of this series, our batting was in tatters. We had no opening pair to speak of. Zahir was a shadow of his former self, and Majid was no longer the batsman he had been. Javed and Wasim Raja performed reasonably, but nobody really stood out. It was obvious that we were going to have a tough time on the tour of Australia that winter. I approached the Australian tour with mixed feelings. I was looking forward to bowling on pitches that would help me for the first time in almost 2 years of Test cricket. On the other hand, the state of the team was depressing, to say the least. There was no team spirit and much ill feeling in the dressing room. It was clear that disaster lay ahead. For a batting side that was so suspect against pace bowling, the fast wicket at Perth was the worst place in which to open a test series. The match began well for us, and our seam attack dismissed Australia for only 180. As I had expected, I was enjoying my bowling and took 4 wickets, but when we came in to bat, all our worst fears were reached, and in no time at all we were 26 for 8 against the bowling of Dennis Lillee and Terry Alderman. Eventually we were bowled out for 62, losing the match by a huge margin of 262 runs. The match was notable for a childish incident between Javed Miandad and Lillee. Our hitherto slow decline was now proceeding at breakneck speed, so much so that we looked like a second-rate team. Imran Khan was flown out to strengthen our batting and immediately looked far more capable of handling pace than most of the team. But this belated infusion could not stop the road. We were easily beaten once again by 10 wickets in the second test at Brisbane. On a pitch that did not have that much pace in it, our batting failed to reach 300. Yet Craig Chappell demonstrated how a batsman could pile up the runs on such a wicket, and his double century was a cool, efficient innings that enabled Australia to declare at 512 for 9. Our second innings was, if anything, an even more pathetic display of batting. The wicket was not doing very much, and we only had to bat out the last day to save the game. Mudassar and Mohsin got us off to a good start, putting on 72 for the first wicket, but the rest of our batting could not last out the 4 hours that were left. On a slower, spinning pitch at Melbourne, we beat Australia by an innings in the third and final test. This was the kind of wicket we were used to playing out in Pakistan, and our batting finally clicked. Although in the end we lost the series only 2-1, this failed to give a true picture of events. We had been shown up as a team of limited resources under conditions that did not favour us. Although I had taken 16 wickets in the 3 tests, made a few runs and was the man of the series, I was not that pleased with myself. It had been a very unhappy tour, and by the end of it most of the players felt thoroughly disgusted. Things got so bad that there was an open and abusive confrontation between Javed and Zahir in the dressing room. The board reappointed Javed Miandad as captain for the Sri Lankan tour of Pakistan beginning in March 1982. By this time, most of the players had serious reservations about his captaincy, but would have probably accepted the board's decision had it not issued a statement implying that senior players were disloyal. The players believed that Javed had told the board that the reason for our disastrous performance was the non-cooperation of senior players. We were furious and certainly not prepared to take such a slur lying down. The entire team issued a counter statement in which we rejected this view and said that we were no longer willing to play under Javed. The board refused to back down and replied by picking an entirely new test side. A few of the players left our ranks after they had been threatened with the loss of their jobs. Nevertheless, the Pakistani team that played against Sri Lanka in the first two tests was really a second 11 team. Pakistan won the first test rather easily but were then very lucky not to be beaten in the second match at Faisalabad. After the second test, the Sri Lankans virtually accused our umpires of cheating to help the home team save the match. Our team's display in this match weakened the board's position and they knew that they would be in real trouble if Pakistan performed as badly in the final test at Lahore. Javed was gently persuaded to resign from the captaincy as soon as the Sri Lankan tests were over. And once he had issued a statement to this effect, that the dispute was resolved and Pakistan once again had a full straightened side for the last test. We beat Sri Lanka by an innings at Lahore. I bowled one of my better spells in Test cricket, taking 14 wickets in the match. I suppose that by not playing in the first two Test matches against the Sri Lankans, I may have lost an opportunity for taking a number of wickets which would have helped the final record, but the performance that had given me real satisfaction have always been against top teams. Before our tour of England in the summer of 1982, there was much speculation about who was going to be the next captain. Matters became rather complicated when Javed and Zahir both made it known that they would not play under each other. It was generally assumed that Javed would be nominated, but at the time there was a question mark over his place in the side, and this prompted the board, much to my surprise, to ring me up in England and ask whether I would be interested in taking the job.